The last time my mother introduced me to a room full of people, she smiled proudly, pointed straight at me, and said, "This is my oldest daughter. The one who never managed to become anything." The room filled with polite laughter. I smiled back because I had learned something long ago. When people underestimate you for years, correcting them becomes a waste of energy. Sometimes the greatest revenge isn't proving them wrong immediately. It's letting them believe their own story until the truth destroys it. What nobody in that room knew was that within 48 hours, the same people would be standing in complete silence while my mother searched for words she had never needed before. My name is Claire Morgan, and I am 37 years old. If you asked anyone in my hometown who I was, you'd hear the exact same story. Claire was the daughter who moved away, but never really succeeded. The one who worked ordinary office jobs. The one who never married. The one who always seemed to be chasing a better life without ever catching it. My younger brother, Daniel, on the other hand, was considered the family's greatest success. He was respected at church, admired by neighbors, and constantly praised by my mother for being dependable, responsible, and always putting family first. According to her, Daniel had become everything a parent could hope for, while I had somehow become the example of wasted potential. For years I tried correcting people. Whenever someone repeated another rumor about my life, I explained the truth. But every explanation somehow turned into another misunderstanding. Every promotion I earned became just luck. Every achievement became not that impressive. After a while, I stopped defending myself. I discovered something strange about people who enjoy judging others. They rarely want the truth. They simply want a story that makes them feel comfortable. So I let them keep theirs while I quietly kept building mine. The only person who had ever truly believed in me was my father. Before he passed away 11 years earlier, he used to tell me something I never forgot. Character grows best where nobody is clapping. At the time, I didn't fully understand those words. Years later, they became the reason I never needed anyone else's approval to keep moving forward. Every early morning, every late night at work, every difficult decision I made carried his voice in the back of my mind, reminding me that success doesn't need an audience while it's being built. 3 weeks before my mother's retirement celebration, my phone rang just as I was finishing a board meeting. Seeing Mom appear on my screen immediately tightened my stomach. We barely spoke anymore except on birthdays or holidays. Her unusually cheerful tone felt almost unfamiliar. "Claire," she said warmly, "everyone will be here next Saturday. Church friends, neighbors, your cousins, the whole family. I expect you to come." "I'll be there," I replied. She hesitated before adding something that sounded more like a warning than a request. "And sweetheart, please don't make the evening about yourself. It's my retirement party." I smiled to myself. She still had no idea what my actual life looked like. She thanked me, ended the call, and never once asked how I had been. I had barely set my phone on my desk when my executive assistant knocked softly before opening the door. "Ms. Morgan," she said carefully, "Mr. Whitmore has canceled every meeting on tomorrow's schedule except one." I looked up. "Yours?" I frowned. "The board chairman will be there too." That had never happened before. As I gathered my notes for the next morning, I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever waited behind Mr. Whitmore's office door wasn't just another meeting. It was the beginning of a life my family would never see coming. The next morning, I arrived at Whitmore Global nearly 30 minutes early. In the 8 years I had worked there, I had been invited into Mr. Whitmore's private office only twice. Both meetings had changed the direction of my career. Something told me this one would change my life. As I stepped onto the executive floor, everything felt unusually quiet. The receptionist greeted me with a nervous smile before escorting me to the boardroom instead of the CEO's office. That immediately caught my attention. The boardroom was reserved for acquisitions, emergency meetings, and executive decisions worth millions of dollars. Whatever this was, it wasn't routine. When the doors opened, I froze for a second. Mr. Whitmore was there. The chairman of the board sat beside him. 3 board members I had only seen during annual shareholder meetings were quietly reviewing documents. Every seat around the long walnut table was occupied except one. Mine. "Good morning, Claire," Mr. Whitmore said with a smile. We've been waiting for you. I sat down, trying to hide the questions racing through my mind. Without saying another word, the chairman slid a thick folder toward me. Open it. Inside were performance reports, financial summaries, leadership evaluations, and something that immediately caught my eye. Confidential executive succession plan. My heartbeat quickened. I looked back up. I don't understand. Mr. Whitmore leaned forward. You remember when I hired you 8 years ago? I nodded. You were the only applicant who admitted during the interview that you didn't know everything. I smiled slightly. I remember. You also said something else. He paused. Integrity is more valuable than experience because experience can be taught. I couldn't believe he still remembered those words. He continued. For the past 8 years we've intentionally placed you in the most difficult departments in this company. Operations, finance, human resources, international logistics, corporate recovery. Every impossible assignment suddenly made sense. None of them had been punishments. They had been tests. The chairman folded his hands. Claire, over the last 18 months we've quietly evaluated every executive in this company. He glanced around the room. Only one person consistently placed the company above personal ambition. The room fell silent. Mr. Whitmore smiled. That person was you. For several seconds I couldn't speak. Then he said something that completely changed everything. I'm retiring in 6 weeks. My mind went blank. He continued calmly. The board has unanimously voted to appoint you as the next chief executive officer of Whitmore Global. I stared at him, convinced I had misunderstood. Me? As of a company with nearly 12,000 employees across 4 countries? The chairman pushed another document toward me. This becomes official on Monday after next week's shareholders announcement. I slowly picked up the papers, still unable to process what I was reading. There it was. My name. Claire Elizabeth Morgan. Incoming Chief Executive Officer. Mr. Whitmore smiled again. Congratulations. The room filled with applause. But instead of excitement, I thought about my mother's retirement party. The same people who believed I had failed at life were about to spend an entire evening telling everyone how disappointed they were in me. I could correct them. I could tell them everything. But somehow, that didn't feel right. Sometimes the truth is most powerful when it arrives exactly at the moment people least expect it. As I left the boardroom carrying the confidential folder, Mr. Whitmore called my name one last time. Claire. I turned around. Keep this between us until the public announcement. I nodded. No one will hear it from me. I had no idea that keeping that promise was about to create the most unforgettable night my family had ever experienced. Because while I was quietly preparing to become the next CEO, my brother was already planning the speech that would publicly humiliate me in front of everyone. Claire spent the next several days carrying a secret that felt almost impossible to keep. Every morning she walked into Whitmore Global as the company's chief operations officer, knowing that in less than 2 weeks she would officially become its next CEO. Yet nothing about her routine changed. She still arrived before sunrise, reviewed overnight reports, visited departments without announcing herself, and stayed long after most executives had gone home. The title waiting for her didn't change the way she worked. If anything, it made her even more determined to earn it. Meanwhile, back in her hometown, an entirely different story was spreading. Her mother proudly told neighbors that Daniel had been helping organize her retirement celebration because Claire was too busy jumping from one ordinary office job to another. At church gatherings, relatives whispered that Claire had probably missed another promotion. One cousin even joked that she would probably show up asking to borrow money again, despite the fact that Claire had never borrowed a single dollar from anyone in the family. Every rumor reached her eventually through mutual friends, but she never corrected them. Years earlier, she would have defended herself. Now she simply smiled and went back to work. She had learned that people who enjoy gossip usually lose interest when they receive no reaction. Late Thursday afternoon, Mr. Whitmore invited Claire into his office once again. This time there were no board members waiting. Only the two of them overlooking the city skyline from the executive floor. I've been thinking about next week's announcement, he said. Claire nodded. So have I. He smiled. You've never asked why the board chose you over executives with more experience. Claire looked out the window before answering. Because I assumed you'd tell me when the time was right. Mr. Whitmore leaned back in his chair. 3 years ago, one of our biggest competitors offered you almost twice your salary. Claire remembered the offer immediately. It had been tempting. A luxury office. A larger team. A massive signing bonus. She had politely declined. You never told anyone why, he continued. I gave my word that I'd help rebuild this company after the recession, Claire replied. Leaving for more money would have made that promise meaningless. Mr. Whitmore smiled proudly. Exactly. He opened a small notebook resting on his desk. For 8 years I've watched talented executives chase titles. You were the only one who chased responsibility instead. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he slid a small black presentation box across the desk. Inside was a simple silver company pin engraved with Whitmore Global's logo. My father gave this to me on the day I became CEO, he said quietly. Now I'm giving it to you. Claire carefully picked it up. It wasn't expensive. It wasn't flashy. Yet somehow it meant more than any bonus she had ever received. As she stood to leave, Mr. Whitmore stopped her one final time. Oh, one more thing. She turned around. The board would like you to attend your mother's retirement party exactly as planned. Claire looked confused. Why? He smiled. Because sometimes life creates opportunities that no public relations team could ever script. Claire laughed softly, still unsure what he meant. Driving home that evening, she couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was unfolding. Her promotion was still confidential, her family still believed she was a failure, and the celebration was only 2 days away. She had no intention of proving anyone wrong. But somewhere deep inside, she felt that the truth was already finding its own way to the surface. As she pulled into her driveway, her phone buzzed with a message from her cousin. It contained just one sentence. And before she even opened it, she somehow knew it was the beginning of another attempt to embarrass her in front of the entire family. Claire opened the message while sitting in her car. It was from her cousin Melissa. Just a heads up. Daniel's been telling everyone you were laid off last month. Mom believes it too. I thought you deserved to know before Saturday. Claire read the text twice before locking her phone. She didn't feel angry. She didn't even feel surprised. For years, Daniel had carefully protected the image of being the family's hero. And the easiest way to keep that image alive was by making sure Claire always looked like the failure. Every achievement she made threatened the version of the story he had spent years creating. If people believed Claire was struggling, they would admire him even more for always being there for the family. She drove home in complete silence. Inside her apartment, she poured herself a cup of coffee and walked onto the balcony overlooking the city. The evening skyline sparkled beneath the setting sun, but her mind was somewhere else. She remembered the countless family dinners where Daniel casually corrected people whenever they complimented her. Claire's promotion? It wasn't really a promotion. She travels for work because nobody else wants those assignments. She's doing okay, but nothing compared to real executives. At first, she believed he was simply competitive. Eventually, she realized something much darker. Daniel didn't just want to succeed. He wanted Claire to fail. Not because she had done anything wrong, but because her success challenged the identity he had built for himself. The following afternoon, Claire arrived at her mother's house to help prepare for the retirement celebration. Cars filled the driveway, and relatives were already decorating the backyard. The moment she stepped inside, conversations suddenly became quieter, then louder again, as if everyone had been talking about her only seconds before she walked through the door. Her Aunt Linda smiled sympathetically. Claire, we're all praying things get better. Claire looked confused. What do you mean? Linda gently placed a hand on her shoulder. Daniel told us your company had to let several employees go. Don't worry, sweetheart. Jobs come and go. Claire finally understood. The lie had spread through the entire family. Instead of correcting anyone, she simply smiled. Thank you, she replied politely. I appreciate your concern. Across the room, Daniel watched the conversation with quiet satisfaction. He expected Claire to defend herself, to argue, to explain. She did none of those things. That unsettled him. Later that evening, while arranging chairs in the backyard, Daniel walked over carrying 2 glasses of lemonade. "You okay?" he asked with fake concern. Claire accepted the drink. "I've fine. I know losing your job must be hard." Claire looked directly into his eyes. "What makes you think I lost my job?" For the first time all day, Daniel hesitated. Only for a second. Then he laughed. "People talk." "No. Gleider bleif gamli." Someone talked. The smile slowly disappeared from his face. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. Daniel finally shrugged. "I was only trying to prepare everyone so they wouldn't ask embarrassing questions." Claire nodded as if she believed him. "I understand." Then she picked up another chair and quietly walked away. From across the yard, Daniel watched her leave. Something felt wrong. Claire wasn't defending herself. She wasn't angry. She wasn't upset. She looked confident. That confidence stayed in his mind for the rest of the evening. Because people with nothing to hide usually explain themselves. People carrying a secret usually smile. As Claire drove home that night, her phone rang. The caller ID displayed Mr. Whitmore's name. She answered immediately, and the first sentence he spoke made her pull her car to the side of the road. "Claire," he said, "I've just received an invitation to your mother's retirement party, and I think it's time your family finally met the woman they've spent years underestimating." Claire pulled her car onto the shoulder of the road and stared at the phone in disbelief. "I'm sorry, did you say you received an invitation?" she asked. Mr. Whitmore chuckled softly. "One of our regional directors attends the same church as your mother. He mentioned the retirement celebration and thought it might be a good networking opportunity. When he told me your family would be there, I realized something." Claire remained silent. "You've spent years protecting your personal life from your professional one," he continued. "Maybe it's time those two worlds finally met." Claire tightened her grip on the steering wheel. "Sir, I don't want anyone to think I'm using my position to prove something." There was a brief pause before he answered. "Claire, this isn't about proving anything. It's about allowing people to see the truth instead of the version they've invented." His words stayed with her long after the call ended. The following morning, Claire arrived at her mother's house earlier than everyone else. Decorations covered the backyard, folding tables lined the garden, and volunteers from the church were already preparing food. Her mother barely looked up as Claire carried several heavy boxes from the garage. "Those centerpieces need to go on every table," she said without even saying good morning. Claire simply nodded and got to work. Throughout the morning she arranged flowers, moved chairs, hung lights, and helped the catering staff. Several relatives walked past without offering to help, yet somehow they still found time to comment on her life. "It's good Claire has free time now," one aunt whispered loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. Being unemployed probably made it easier for her to come early. A few people laughed. Claire heard every word but continued placing flowers on the tables as though nothing had happened. Around noon, Daniel arrived wearing an expensive tailored suit and designer sunglasses. The moment he stepped into the backyard, relatives gathered around him. He shook hands, accepted compliments, and effortlessly became the center of attention. Watching from across the yard, Claire noticed something she had never paid attention to before. Daniel wasn't simply enjoying the attention, he depended on it. Every compliment seemed to feed his confidence. Every comparison between the two of them made him stand a little taller. It suddenly became clear that his greatest achievement wasn't becoming successful. It was convincing everyone that Claire wasn't. As guests continued arriving, Claire overheard another conversation that made everything click into place. Daniel was speaking with two family friends near the entrance. "I feel bad for Claire," he said with a rehearsed sigh. "Losing her job really affected her confidence. That's why Mom asked everyone not to bring it up tonight. We're just trying to support her through a difficult time." Claire stood only a few feet away carrying a tray of glasses. Neither man noticed she had heard every word. For the first time in years she didn't feel hurt. Instead she smiled quietly. Daniel believed he was controlling the story. He had no idea the ending had already changed. Just as Claire finished arranging the final table, her phone vibrated. It was a short message from Mr. Whitmore. I'll be there at exactly 6:30. Please don't announce me. I want to see everyone's reactions naturally. Claire slipped the phone back into her pocket, took a slow breath, and looked around at the smiling faces filling the backyard. Every person there believed they already knew who she was. None of them realized that in less than an hour, one unexpected arrival would completely destroy the story they had believed for years. And Daniel was about to make the biggest mistake of his life in front of every single witness. Claire slipped her phone back into her purse and continued greeting guests as though nothing had happened. Every smile she received felt different now because she knew something they didn't. Mr. Whitmore would be standing in this very backyard in less than an hour, yet not a single person suspected it. She wasn't excited about proving anyone wrong. In fact, the thought made her uncomfortable. What mattered most wasn't finally being recognized. It was finally allowing the truth to exist without defending it. For years she had carried the weight of everyone's assumptions. Tonight she intended to set that weight down forever. The retirement celebration officially began just after 6 o'clock. Nearly 80 guests filled the backyard. Former teachers, church members, neighbors, cousins, and lifelong family friends laughed together beneath strings of warm lights hanging across the garden. Claire quietly moved between tables, helping the catering staff refill drinks and clear empty plates. More than once, people mistook her for one of the event helpers. She didn't correct them. A simple smile was easier than another unnecessary explanation. Her mother soon stepped onto the small stage set up near the garden and welcomed everyone. After thanking friends and colleagues for attending, she began sharing memories from her 35 years as a teacher. The audience listened warmly, applauding several times. Then, almost without warning, she turned toward Claire. "I've always believed every parent has one child who makes life easier," she said with a smile. "For me, that's been Daniel." The guests immediately applauded. Daniel stood proudly and waved. Claire remained seated. Her mother continued speaking. "Daniel has always been dependable. He built a wonderful career, stayed close to home, and never stopped putting family first." She paused before adding, "Not every child chooses that path, but I suppose that's just how life works." Several people glanced toward Claire. Some looked uncomfortable. Others nodded as though they completely agreed. Daniel slowly stood, pretending to look embarrassed by the attention. "I've only done what any good son would do," he said modestly. The applause grew even louder. Claire quietly lowered her eyes to the glass of water in front of her. She wasn't hurt anymore. What surprised her most was how predictable the moment felt. It was almost as if everyone had rehearsed their roles years ago. Her mother praised. Daniel accepted admiration. The guests believed every word. And Claire remained the silent disappointment. Just as Daniel prepared to sit back down, one of his friends called out jokingly, "Maybe Claire can ask Daniel for career advice after dinner." Laughter spread across the audience. Even a few relatives who knew better smiled politely. Claire looked up and calmly returned the joke with a gentle smile. "I'll keep that in mind." Her unexpected response confused several people. They had expected embarrassment. Instead, she looked completely at peace. Daniel noticed it too. For the first time that evening, he began to feel uneasy. He checked his watch. 6:28 p.m. 2 minutes later, a black luxury sedan slowly pulled into the driveway. Moments after that, a second vehicle stopped behind it. Then a third. One by one, several sharply dressed executives stepped out, followed by an older gentleman whose face instantly caught the attention of half the guests near the entrance. Conversations stopped. People began whispering. Daniel frowned. His mother looked toward the driveway in confusion. Claire quietly stood from her chair. Because the man walking through the front gate wasn't there by accident. He was walking directly toward her. And within the next 60 seconds, every lie that had defined Claire's life for more than 20 years was about to collapse in front of everyone who had ever believed it. The entire backyard fell silent as the black sedan came to a smooth stop near the front entrance. Curious conversations faded into whispers. Even the children running across the lawn slowed down to watch. One after another, for professionally dressed men and women stepped out of the vehicles before holding the rear door open for an older gentleman with silver hair and an unmistakable air of quiet authority. Nobody recognized him except Claire. She took a slow breath. It was Richard Whitmore. But something immediately felt different. He wasn't wearing a business suit. Instead, he wore a simple navy blazer without a company pin or name badge, almost as if he wanted to arrive as an ordinary guest instead of one of the country's most respected executives. Daniel frowned as he watched the group approach. "Do you know them?" one cousin whispered. "No idea," another replied. Claire remained exactly where she was. Mr. Whitmore smiled warmly the moment their eyes met. "There you are," he said as if greeting an old friend. "It's good to finally see you outside the office." Several guests exchanged confused looks. Outside the office, Daniel's confident smile began to fade. Claire walked forward and shook his hand. "Thank you for coming." "I wouldn't have missed it," he replied. Her mother quickly stepped forward, forcing a polite smile. "Good evening. I'm Margaret Morgan." Mr. Whitmore shook her hand respectfully. "Congratulations on your retirement." "Thank you," she answered. "May I ask, how do you know Claire?" Before Claire could speak, Mr. Whitmore answered himself. "We've worked together for quite some time." The response sounded simple. Almost too simple. Daniel relaxed slightly. "So she's one of your employees?" he asked with a friendly laugh. "That's nice." Mr. Whitmore looked at him for a brief moment before smiling. "You could say that." Claire noticed the small smile on his face. He wasn't trying to embarrass anyone. He was allowing assumptions to reveal themselves naturally. The conversation shifted as more guests gathered around. One retired teacher asked what business Mr. Whitmore worked in. "We're in logistics and supply chain management," he replied. Another guest mentioned hearing the company had recently expanded internationally. Mr. Whitmore nodded. "We've grown a great deal over the last few years." Daniel immediately joined the discussion. "I've always admired successful companies," he said confidently. "I actually give financial advice to several business owners myself." "Do you?" Mr. Whitmore asked politely. Daniel smiled. "Yes. Leadership fascinates me." Mr. Whitmore glanced toward Claire before looking back at Daniel. "Then you'll probably appreciate how difficult it is to find people who lead with integrity instead of ego." Daniel nodded confidently, completely unaware of the deeper meaning behind those words. Claire quietly watched the exchange. For years she had imagined what this moment might feel like if the truth ever surfaced. Surprisingly, she didn't feel victorious. She felt peaceful. Because for the first time in her life, she wasn't carrying the burden of proving who she was. Reality was introducing itself. As dinner continued, guests naturally included Mr. Whitmore in their conversations. Nobody asked Claire another question about losing her job. Nobody offered sympathy anymore. Instead, they kept wondering why one of the most respected businessmen in the state seemed to know her so well. Then, just as dessert was being served, one of the board members who had arrived with Mr. Whitmore accidentally placed a leather portfolio on the table. It fell open. Several official documents slid onto the floor. One page landed face up. Daniel instinctively bent down to pick it up. His eyes stopped on a single line printed across the top. He didn't say a word. The color slowly disappeared from his face. Because the document he was holding wasn't meant for the public, and the name printed beneath the words Chief Executive Officer, effective Monday, belonged to the one person he had spent years calling a failure. Daniel's fingers tightened around the document before he quickly folded it shut. For a split second, panic flashed across his face, but years of pretending everything was under control allowed him to recover almost instantly. He forced a smile, slipped the paper back into the leather portfolio, and quietly placed it on the table without saying a word. Claire noticed. So did Mr. Whitmore. Neither of them reacted. The evening continued as though nothing had happened, but Daniel's confidence had disappeared. He kept glancing toward Claire, searching for some sign that she knew what he had seen. Instead, she laughed politely with a group of retired teachers and helped the catering staff clear empty plates. The more normal she acted, the more unsettled he became. A few minutes later, Daniel excused himself and walked into the house. He closed the kitchen door behind him before pulling out his phone. "Mark," he whispered as soon as someone answered. "I need you to check something." His friend worked in corporate recruitment. "I just saw a confidential document with Claire's name on it. I need to know everything about Whitmore Global's executive team. There was a brief silence. Then Mark replied, I can't access confidential records, but give me 10 minutes. Daniel ended the call and looked at his reflection in the kitchen window. For the first time in years, he wasn't sure he knew his own sister. Outside, the celebration continued. Claire's mother was surrounded by former colleagues, happily accepting congratulations on her retirement. Watching her from across the yard, Claire felt something she hadn't expected. Compassion. Her mother wasn't an evil person. She had simply believed the loudest voice for far too long. Daniel had spent years carefully shaping everyone's opinion, always presenting himself as the dependable son while quietly diminishing every accomplishment Claire made. Eventually, the story became stronger than the truth. Mr. Whitmore walked over and stood beside Claire. You look calmer than I expected, he said. Claire smiled. I've spent years imagining this night. And it turns out peace feels much better than revenge. Mr. Whitmore nodded with quiet approval. That's why the board chose you. Before Claire could respond, Daniel returned from the house. His smile looked forced. His eyes kept moving between Claire and Mr. Whitmore. He was waiting for his friend to call back. Exactly 12 minutes later, his phone vibrated. He stepped away from the crowd and answered immediately. Mark sounded unusually serious. I don't know what document you saw, he said, but I can tell you this. Daniel held his breath. Claire Morgan isn't just another employee. His heart began pounding. She's one of the most respected executives in the entire company. Last quarter she led the acquisition that every business magazine has been talking about. Daniel felt the ground disappear beneath him. But that's not the strange part. What do you mean? Daniel whispered. Mark lowered his voice. This afternoon, someone inside Whitmore Global told me the board is preparing the biggest leadership announcement in the company's history. Daniel's mouth went dry. He slowly turned toward the backyard. Claire was standing only a few yards away, smiling as she spoke with guests who had spent years believing she was a failure. For the first time in his life, Daniel wasn't worried about losing an argument. He was terrified that he had completely misunderstood the person standing across from him. Claire slowly walked toward the center of the garden and looked around at the people who had spent years believing a version of her life that was never true. She didn't ask for an apology. She didn't remind anyone how often they had underestimated her. Instead, she took a slow breath and spoke with complete calm. I know many of you are surprised tonight, but I'm not standing here because I wanted to prove anyone wrong. Success was never my goal. Peace was. The backyard became completely silent. She looked at her mother before continuing. For years, I kept waiting for my family to believe in me. Eventually, I realized something. If your confidence depends on other people's opinions, you'll spend your whole life asking for permission to become who you're meant to be. Her mother lowered her eyes. Daniel tried to interrupt. Claire, I think you're making this bigger than it is. Claire smiled gently. No, Daniel. I spent years making it smaller than it was. Those words hit harder than any angry speech ever could. Mr. Whitmore stepped beside her, not to defend her, but simply to acknowledge the years of work she had quietly put in. I've worked with Claire for nearly a decade, he said. In every difficult decision, every crisis, and every opportunity, she chose integrity over recognition. That's why people trust her. Leadership isn't built on titles. It's built on character. Nobody applauded. Nobody spoke. The silence itself carried more weight than applause ever could. Claire turned back toward her mother. I don't need an apology tonight. I only hope that one day you'll stop measuring people by rumors and start measuring them by who they become when nobody is watching. Tears filled her mother's eyes. For the first time in years, she saw her daughter without comparison, without gossip, and without Daniel's version of the story standing between them. Claire quietly picked up her coat and walked toward the exit. She didn't leave as the family's disappointment. She didn't leave as the new CEO. She left as a woman who no longer needed anyone else's approval. As she reached her car, her phone vibrated. It was a short message from Mr. Whitmore. Monday morning, 9 a.m. Your first board meeting as CEO. Claire smiled, looked once more at the house behind her, and drove away. Not to escape her past, but to begin the future she had earned through years of quiet perseverance. Final lesson. People will often judge your life using the smallest chapter they've seen, while you are busy writing an entirely different book. You don't owe anyone constant explanations, endless arguments, or permission to succeed. Let your actions speak so consistently that one day the truth introduces itself without you saying a single word. Real success isn't making your critics feel small. It's becoming so secure in who you are that their opinions no longer control your happiness. The greatest revenge isn't watching the people who doubted you regret their choices. It's reaching a place where their opinion no longer matters, because you've already become the person you were always meant to be.